All right, Mr. Schaefer, would you get juror number 20 for us? All right. Come on up, have a seat. And you are juror number 20, is that correct?
Correct.
All right. Before I turn things over to the lawyers, I want to go over a few things. First of which is I have to swear you in so that all your answers are under oath. So if you could raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
I will.
All right, thank you. You filled out a questionnaire, and thank you for doing that and taking the time and submitting it. First of all, was everything true on that questionnaire?
Yes.
All right. Is there any change or additions you want to make? Or even change, and when I say change, because sometimes you'll fill it out, and then you realize after you've submitted it, I forgot about this or that, and so, boy, I really would like to change something. Anything?
No.
All right. When the lawyers are asking questions, it might inspire something, and you might say, oh, yeah, I did forget that. This is not a problem. This is the natural way that things work out. You give it your best shot at the beginning, and then things come up.
Yep.
So feel free to volunteer that extra information.
Absolutely.
As it stands right now, though, you don't have any...
No, not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. And now you're not supposed to read articles, and I think that was in the questionnaire, avoid media coverage of this. You've been able to do that?
Yes, for the most part.
Okay, and I'm glad you say for the most part, because no matter how hard people try, sometimes inadvertently you get exposed to something. A headline, somebody says, oh, did you read this? And they tell you about it. And since you're not supposed to tell anybody you're a potential juror, it's not like you can go, right?
Correct.
Any of that happened that you received more information about this case from media or anybody else?
No, and the reason why I said that was just, I'm aware that this trial is going on.
Right.
That's it.
Okay.
Nothing.
So maybe that the timing, but nothing about the substance of the case or the parties or...
And not too much into detail, no.
Okay. Excellent. You did have some knowledge about the case before you were summoned. As most people, if not all people, have. You understand that if you are on the jury in this case, that you must make your decision based on only what you hear and see in the courtroom. That is what is actually in evidence. Do you think you could do that?
Yes.
Essentially put aside the things you've heard and put aside also any opinions, because it's okay to have an opinion based on what you saw on the media. It's not okay to bring it in and make a judgment based on your opinion.
Sure.
That is not based on the evidence in the courtroom. You understand that?
Yes.
All right. Okay. You were given a long list of witnesses. Did you recognize any of the names on that list?
Yes, there's one.
Okay. Who's that?
Member of the BCA I'm friends with, casual friends with. That was on the front page here. I started here.
Do you remember the name?
Yes, it is Mackenzie Anderson.
Okay. And how do you know?
We're friends of friends probably since college, so 15 years, but very casual. Actually, after I saw that list, I went back in my phone when was the last time I contacted her. We had contact. It was over a year and a half ago, 2 years. So obviously no discussion about the case, and I've not spoken with her in a year or two.
Okay. And have you talked to her about her work, what she does on a day-to-day basis?
Yes, but never before this case.
Okay.
If that makes sense, you know what I mean?
And what does she do? What's
I
your
believe she's a
understanding?
forensic scientist,
Okay.
in a general term.
Do you think that relationship, or maybe general knowledge that she's imparted to you in your just casual discussions, do you think that would affect your ability to be fair and impartial in this case?
I don't believe it'll affect that, no. And I was thinking about it, and especially in her line of work, forensics, it's very science. It's not very something where you have to try to get someone to believe something, right? So I don't believe it would affect that, no.
All right. Thank you. There is one item on your questionnaire I did want to talk to you about, and that's the length of trial. And if you are selected for this jury, we will start with opening statements and evidence March 29th. We anticipate it's going to be about 4 weeks, so pretty much into April. And I notice you say that you're potentially getting married in April. Tell me about that.
I believe at the time, I'm still getting married. I believe at the time of the questionnaire we did not have a date. We have selected a date of May 1st. So that does give me a little bit of cold feet about this situation of, geez, if this goes 4 weeks, it's going to bump right up against that.
Well, and we never know how long
Correct.
jurors will be in deliberation. And so do you think that if you were in deliberation, is there a lot of preparation made for this?
So it is a wedding located in Florida. It's a smaller wedding, but there would be 30 family members going. Flights have been booked. It's not a huge financial undertaking where we're spending tens of thousands of dollars on something that would go away, but it would be an inconvenience, and obviously not the way you want to spend your wedding date, right?
Right, and the question comes up, I hope we are done by May 1st, but with deliberations, as I said, do you think that would be like, you'd be going, we got to make a decision here because I got a wedding to get to, my own?
I don't believe so. I mean, I think if I am part of this jury, I think we would have to make accommodations for that date. I would probably operate under the fact that if I'm on this jury, I will not be able to get married on that date.
Okay. I think you're...
Again, that's me answering, not my fiance.
I'm going to go out on a limb and suggest that she does not want to be as accommodating. But I appreciate your...
Probably, but we understand the process and what needs to happen.
All right. I'm going to pass it to the lawyers then, and they'll ask some questions. So, Juror 20, if you would, Mr. Nelson.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Just to refresh your recollection, my name is Derek Nelson. I'm the attorney for Mr. Chauvin. Thank you for your patience yesterday and for coming in this morning.
Yes.
So what I'm going to do, sir, is just ask you some kind of general questions, get to know you a little bit, and then I'm going to ask you some follow-up questions about some answers on your questionnaire. Is that okay with you?
Yep.
I know it's been a while since you've
Yeah.
read this, so if there's anything that you have a question about, we'll talk about it. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
All right. So let me ask you this: if you and I were to meet in some social situation, what would a couple of things you want me to walk away knowing about you?
About myself, I'm a father. I'm a devoted father, into sports, music. I'm guessing if we ran into each other at a social situation, it would be with a beer at a bar, maybe before or after a game or a concert.
Sounds good. And when you first received your jury duty notice or your summons for jury duty, what was your initial reaction when you saw that?
Just a standard reaction. I don't think anyone ever gets a jury duty notice and goes, hooray, I got jury duty. But I've never been involved in this process before, so just standard, run-of-the-mill. Okay, my number was up, and now I have to participate in jury duty.
Okay. And how about when you learned that it was potentially as a juror in this case?
Yeah, that changed a little bit where I obviously know the gravity about this case, and when I first read that first line about the case, I kind of took a step back and went, whoa, this is a big deal.
Okay. What were your thoughts? Did you have concerns? Were you?
No, concerns wouldn't be the right answer. I mean, just again, the the magnitude of this case, I would think, is what struck me. You know, it wasn't a, oh no, I can't believe I'm going to be participating in this case, or yes, I get to participate in this case. I think it's just the magnitude of the case struck me.
Sure. How about when you got to the government center yesterday and saw its current condition?
Yeah, I think it just further solidified the magnitude, you know, reading that juror letter and then seeing it in person, like, okay, this is, you know, the magnitude does match what I had going on in my head. It's playing out in real life.
Right. Do you have concerns for your physical safety?
Not really, no. And I know that's not a yes or no answer, but obviously, again, back to the magnitude of this case, I know there's a lot of people watching, will be watching, but I don't lie awake at night going, I'm in fear of my safety on this case.
Great. Did it comfort you to some degree to learn that you would remain anonymous?
Yes.
At this point,
Yep.
at least? Okay, great. So I understand, based on your questionnaire, that you, again, don't say the name of your company. We're trying to protect people's identities here at this point. But I understand you're in like sales management. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
How many people work for you?
I work with a team. That's a tough question. I probably work with a team of about 20 people across the U.S.
Okay. Do you meet with them regularly, talk to them regularly?
Yes.
In your professional life, can you think of a circumstance where, and I'm just going to back up for a second, are you in like a management role of that?
No, not necessarily. More of managing the data, providing information to our sales team across the country.
Okay. So can you think of a situation in your professional life or your personal life where you've been called upon to resolve a conflict between two people?
Yes, I'm sure. Again, probably to very less magnitude for what we're here in this room, but yes.
Right. So I guess the question is what are the tools that you use to try to resolve conflict between?
Yeah, I would say, you know, definitely a very logical person, hear both sides, try to go with what is the best direction going forward. Eliminate emotion as much as possible is what I would use in my professional life.
Okay. Now, in kind of in a similar vein, have you been called upon in a conflict resolution to kind of determine which person is telling the truth? Two people come to you. The first person says, "This is what happens." The second person says, "No, that's not what happened. This is what happened." Right?
Outside of a 5-year-old fighting with his cousin, not really. Again, other than what the general public would come up with, but nothing jumps out to my mind of a complete resolution of trying to find a truth teller.
So keeping it at that simplest, most basic form, the 5-year-old, right? Mm-hmm. How do you determine, is my son telling the truth or is his cousin telling the truth?
Yep, correct. So hearing the argument, you know, hearing them talk through what happened and assess the situation, maybe, you know, step by step. Mm-hmm. And, you know, determine who you would go with of who is telling the truth.
Okay. Can you think of a situation in your life where you were 100% certain about something only to later learn that you were wrong?
Oh, I'm sure. I can't think of a specific experience, but I'm sure there's probably at some point in my life where I was in conviction of something and it was not true.
Okay. Are you the type of person who's willing to keep an open mind?
Yes.
So one of the things you'll ultimately be instructed in is that you have to follow the law, even if you disagree with the law. Mm-hmm. Do you think you can do that?
Yes.
All right. Now, I understand your fiance is a lawyer or graduated from law school?
Correct.
Again, not without saying anything, is she practicing law?
No.
Okay. Does she have an intent to practice law?
I don't believe so.
Okay. But obviously she has an education as an attorney. She has a Juris Doctor, right?
Yep.
And if you were to be a juror in this trial and you were to go home and you heard some piece of evidence or you heard some ruling of law, would you turn to her and say, you know, the judge said this today. Can you explain what this means to me?
I would not. You know, I respect the system and what is expected of me as a juror. And just knowing to handle the case within, these four walls is what's expected of me. So I'm sorry, I'm not sure how you phrase your question, but I do not find a problem with that.
Okay. So you would agree that you could follow the law even if you disagreed with the law?
Correct. And
you wouldn't try to glean any sort of insider information on rulings that the judge may make from your fiance. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Great. Any concerns regarding COVID?
No, I mean, other than and when going back to maybe the timing of the case, and again, when scheduling a wedding during a COVID era, we are under the impression that you can never schedule anything more than 48 hours out. So in terms of COVID concerns, it would be if there was a COVID incident and the affecting the case timing, if it would have to be delayed or paused for a week. I don't even know if that's possible or what would happen, but for concerns, that would be the only ones.
Okay. Now I'm going to just turn to your questionnaire again. I understand it's been a while since you've reviewed it. You've obviously, you're familiar, like all of us, with this case.
Correct, yes.
And you had, I believe, answered that you'd viewed a particular video, the Facebook video or the viral video,
Sure.
2 to 3 times.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I would say maybe once in its entirety, and when I say entirety, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was about 6 or 8 minutes. I don't think it was from start to finish, but I probably made it to the completion of the video one time, and I've probably seen clips of that 2 more times.
Okay. And then obviously maybe little snippets in the media and things of that nature.
Yeah, but outside of maybe a screenshot on a headline, that's about it.
Okay. And have you, it's fair to say you formed some opinions about the case.
Yes, a bit. Again, watching a video, obviously you have an opinion when you watch it, and I tried to share that as best I could in the questionnaire.
Yep. And I guess what I'm questioning is that you understand that that's just one piece of potential evidence in this case.
Yes, absolutely.
And you may see multiple other camera angles, you may see multiple other pieces of evidence. I mean, I think you've seen the witness list, right? It's almost
Sure.
400 people long.
Yeah.
Are you willing to kind of hear both sides, pay attention to all of that, and keep an open mind about all of the evidence, not just that one video?
Yes.
Because you did indicate in your questionnaire that you had a somewhat negative opinion of what you saw in that initial video.
Yep, absolutely.
And you provided a written description, and you say, you wrote that before, during, and after being placed into custody, Mr. Floyd appeared to be under the influence and somewhat unruly. Did you see other videos in connection with this case that may have made it to the media?
No.
Okay. How did you form the opinion in your mind that he appeared to be under the influence and unruly?
I am having a little trouble with that statement. I think I've just heard through the case that I'm assuming when someone's in handcuffs, they're in handcuffs for a reason. But no, I did not witness or see unruly behavior, so to speak, during those videos.
So, I mean, you have received information from other sources, friends, family members, colleagues. I mean, people are talking about it, right?
Well, I think yes and no, but that information for me is the both sides to every argument angle, right? Is obviously you see a person who dies in police custody. That is a very negative connotation. And to me, sometimes I wonder, well, who would be on the positive side of that, right? And the term that would have been used was there was a reason he was placed in custody.
Okay.
And that would be where that sentiment would be placed from.
Fair enough. And I think that you answered, there was a question that says, have you talked about George Floyd's death with your family, friends, coworkers, discussed it online? You indicated that you had, and that you've shared the feeling that you have felt the event did not need to end in his death.
Correct.
ultimately you would agree that you would be able to, would you agree that you would be able to put all of your personal opinions, what you've heard, kind of off to the side, and decide the case on the evidence that's presented in this court?
Yes.
There is a question about whether you have ever personally seen the police use more force than was needed, and you answered yes, watching the television show Cops.
Correct. So, and the reason I say that is I've never witnessed it in person, but I have witnessed that television show many, many times. In fact, my dad and I used to watch it all the time, and you do see physical force being used within that show.
Okay. And whether it was more force than was necessary, I guess perhaps is a question.
Sorry, what was the end of that question?
The question was whether it was more force than was needed.
Correct, and this is coming from a viewer at home, not having all the data, right?
Sure. Okay. I want to ask you briefly about your relationship with Miss Anderson.
Okay.
How did you get to know Miss Anderson?
So one of my best friends in college was friends with her in high school. So kind of a friend of friend that started probably in college. We remained friends for a couple years. She went to grad school and weren't really in a close talking relationship. A few years ago, we played a rec league volleyball team together, I believe for 2 summers, 1 or 2 summers. But again, haven't spoken to her in probably a year and a half, and obviously nothing about this case.
Perfect. So I guess my question, because you had said something when the judge was asking you about it, about, you know what she does for a living, and that her role probably would be somewhat minimal, and not minimal necessarily, but somewhat, I'm trying to remember the phrase that you used, but that she wouldn't be attacked, her credibility would not necessarily be attacked?
Correct. I think I phrased in the form of her position in the BCA is, revolved around science and fact. So when you're talking about someone testifying, it's not really a witness that, do I believe this person or not? It's usually something that someone with this background and professional background would be sharing, something that's hopefully supported by science, right?
Okay, so let me ask you this hypothetical question. If Miss Anderson was more involved in the case than simply being in a laboratory and conducting scientific experiments, so if she was a part of the investigation of this case in some fashion, and I were to attack her credibility, right, and I were to say, you should have done A, you should have done B, how would that affect you in your mind?
Again, trying to maintain what needs to be done within these 4 walls. You have a job to do. She has a job to do. I'd be willing to hear out the argument of what was done wrong, maybe her response to why she didn't do that, why she did it the way she was, how she is trained, etc.
And so, if you were ultimately, would you be willing to be ultimately convinced that maybe she did something wrong in this case?
Sure, yes.
Your Honor, may we have a brief sidebar just about a different issue?
Still on the record. Mr. Nelson.
Thank you. Your Honor, if I may have just a moment to consult with my client and team. Glasses, hearing aids, masks, it all gets twisted. Sir, I just have one line of follow-up questioning for you, and it's about your wedding.
Sure. Yes.
I know that you can't speak for your fiance, but in the event that this trial did last past May 1st, how significant of a hardship would that be for you?
I mean, it would be obviously disappointing. We would obviously like for this to occur as normal. I think the COVID situation on top of this, we knew that planning this wedding, everything can go haywire in a COVID era. And then now with the jury duty, we both operated under the assumption, well, we'll plan the wedding. If we have to pivot, we'll have to pivot. Personally, yes, I would love to get married on May 1st to my fiance. We have something beautiful planned, but there's other things that occur in life, and really that's in your guys' hands to if we have to take that action or not.
Okay. Your Honor, I'll pass for cause.
Good morning.
Hello.
Juror number 20.
Yes.
I need to ask you, following up on your wedding, do you have an extended honeymoon planned?
No.
Okay.
Nope. We both love to be in Minnesota in the summer, so we didn't have anything planned following the wedding.
It's really the only time anyone loves to be in Minnesota, isn't it?
Yeah,
Summer
absolutely.
and fall. All right. You indicated that you feel that the sort of modifications they've made here in terms of COVID and the distancing and whatnot, do you feel safe in this environment?
Yes.
Okay. I was interested, you talked a little bit about attending sporting events.
Yes.
Is that right? Do you go to games at the stadium? Football fan?
Yeah, absolutely. Viking season ticket holder, go to Twins games, Gopher games all the time.
You're a season ticket holder?
Yeah, part of a family group.
Okay. But not in 2020?
No.
All right. Did you watch the Super Bowl last year?
Yep.
There's some people who have decided to not watch NFL football anymore as a sort of a protest to players who had taken a knee during the national anthem. Are you aware of that?
Sure, yes.
What are your thoughts about that?
My thoughts is the players can do whatever they'd like to voice any sort of protests or beliefs.
Some notion somehow disrespectful to law enforcement or military members. What are your thoughts about that?
I'm kind of on the belief that law enforcement, or especially military members, defend our country for the right to believe what you want to believe.
You have a cousin who's a law enforcement officer?
Yeah, and I was curious if I wrote that on the questionnaire. I believe so. He lives on the East Coast. We don't stay in contact regularly. I don't believe he is employed as a law enforcement member currently. And to be honest, I don't know how long ago it was, but I know at one time he was a police officer.
Okay. When do you think the last time you had contact?
If I had to guess, let's say 4 or 5 years ago, but kind of purely a guess, sorry.
And when do you think the next time you'd have contact with him?
Oh, I'm sorry. I answered I answered the fact of when you thought, or when I thought he was last a police officer.
Oh.
Did you ask when I was last in contact with him?
I did.
Okay.
Although why don't we start over?
Sure, great.
You think he might have been a police officer about 4 years ago?
Yes, so sorry to clarify that. Again, I believe he was last a police officer 4 or 5 years ago. The last time I saw him was at my cousin's wedding. Now, shoot, I'm blending on the dates. Obviously, nothing happened last year, so it was 2 years ago.
And the next time you would plan to see him?
Probably at my wedding reception, would be end of the year.
How do you think you would be able to distinguish between the testimony of a law enforcement officer, between that testimony and the testimony of, say, a lay witness? Would you give a law enforcement officer more credibility, less credibility than just another ordinary fact witness?
Yeah, I would say in terms of, obviously, in a trial, witnessing a situation, I would agree that a police officer is probably more trained to observe the situation and is likely better at sharing that testimony in more fact-based than maybe a witness might be more eligible to be more emotional-based. They're obviously not trained to take in a surrounding. Again, I'm speaking in generalities. That doesn't mean all law enforcement will be able to properly do that. Not all witnesses, will not be able to. But to answer your question, I would believe the police officer would be more trained to assess the situation and share it in a court format.
And I appreciate the distinction about the training. I'm wondering if you think, just in terms of credibility, would you think that a police officer, in general terms, would be more honest than ordinary bystander?
Yeah, again, honesty is a tough question there. I hope I'm not dodging the question, and please ask me again if I'm not. But in terms of, trying to remove emotion from the situation, I would think a police officer would be better equipped to do that rather than a witness.
Okay. And but I think you were again referring to the training, and what I'm wondering, just in terms of telling the truth, would an officer, in your opinion, be more likely to tell the truth than, say, a bystander?
I would say yes, but that doesn't mean they're completely out of the realm of not telling the truth. Let me know if I didn't phrase that correctly.
Maybe you just explain why you believe that.
I would say just in terms of signing up for duty for what a police officer is responsible for doing, you would assume that they're upholding of the law, truthful and honest. Does that mean a police officer cannot lie? No. But again, that's where I'd maybe bump it up a little bit, that through the job that they're willing to take and what they're doing and what they see in their day-to-day life and their training, that's why I would bump that up.
And so in a hypothetical scenario at trial, if you had witness A, who is a bystander, says that they saw an event and it happened in a particular way, and then witness B was a law enforcement officer, and they testified that it didn't happen that way at all. So these two witnesses are completely at odds. Do you think you would tend to favor the law enforcement officer, witness B's account?
I think all things being equal, yes, but how I operate personally is I would like to try to separate thought from fact and be able to kind of play out the situation of what occurred rather than try to take someone's word for it. I know that's not always possible in a case.
It might not always be possible, and what you need to do, I guess, for our purposes here is just kind of search yourself a little and tell me, how difficult would it be for you to set aside any ideas you would have about sort of the inherent honesty of a police officer, to be able to set that aside completely, and to evaluate each witness and their testimony on its own?
Yes, so I would be able to do that within the case, yes.
I want to talk to you about one of the survey questions that you answered regarding the dangerousness of the job of a law enforcement officer and how that relates to whether or not they should be questioned, the work that they do in the line of duty be questioned. And so the question was phrased, because law enforcement officers have such dangerous jobs, it is not right to second guess decisions they make while on duty. And you indicated that you somewhat agree with that statement. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so I think the reason I answered that way is there's obviously tense situations that police officers have to incur in their line of duty. And some of that takes split-second decision-making, right? And is it right to question a split-second decision-making after the fact? And that's tough to do. In terms of over the course of time, maybe wasn't an immediate reaction. I think that is more in those where you took action over the course of 10, 15 minutes. That's more up for debate. Whether something happened split second, something else happened. That's just instincts what you have to do, and that's tough to second guess that in those situations.
Some might argue that because of this, the discretion that officers need to have in the field doing their dangerous job, that misconduct is more appropriately examined in an administrative hearing or like in a criminal court. What do you think of that?
I guess I would say that in my beliefs that wouldn't be completely true. There could be something at odds for a criminal case of action taken towards someone that was more than necessary, and maybe it wasn't necessary. I think that is definitely could be the case in a criminal case.
And so you think it would be appropriate then for that officer to be charged criminally, and if proved guilty, held accountable for that conduct?
Yes.
You answered that you believed, or you somewhat agreed with the statement that the criminal justice system is biased against racial and ethnic minorities. Can you tell us why you somewhat agree with that statement?
Yeah, I think, to analyze things, if you look at the data of arrests, even arrests for small offenses like a marijuana arrests are highly skewed more towards Black Americans than white. So I do believe there is, a systematic issue at hand, and I wish our country and world would get better at that.
You indicated that you have a very favorable opinion of the...
Yes.
Can you explain why you have a favorable view of that group?
I think in this country, if you have a sector of our population that feel that not only are they being treated on matter, that is a huge issue, and anyone who believes that is happening, I'm to be more recognized. Not only, when you look at the phrase Black Lives Matter, yes, they do matter, and I don't know why anyone would be against that movement.
And you expressed a somewhat unfavorable view of the group Blue Lives Matter. Can you please explain that?
Yeah, so the Blue Lives Matter, I felt, excuse me for speaking this way, but was, in terms of using that exact phrasing of Blue Lives Matter, kind of a rip-off marketing perspective of Black Lives Matter, I thought that was not offensive is the right term, but short-sighted. The term, I think that if you want to read it back to me, the term, there was the question, do you have a problem with the term Blue Lives Matter? I'm sorry.
No, it's just what is your opinion of Blue Lives Matter? Yeah,
correct. So Blue Lives Matter, I feel like is a direct, indirect of Black Lives Matter, which I would not be in support of. If the question was phrased, are you in support of police enforcement, I would say yes.
Okay. You indicated that you somewhat agreed with a statement that people today do not give our law enforcement officers the respect they deserve. Can you explain why you believe it?
Yeah, I think with with what's going on, it's easy to make broad statements that, again, when you asked me a couple questions ago, is there a systematic issue of racial injustice in our system? It's easy to point your fingers and say, yes, we're arresting too many black people for not the right reasons. It's easy to point your finger at police enforcement, law enforcement officers and say, you are all bad. I don't agree that is the sentiment, right? Is there bad police enforcement officers? I'm sure there is. Are there good ones? Yes. So I don't think it's right to completely blame the entire organization.
Because as to the question whether police in this country treat whites and blacks equally, you said you somewhat disagree that they do.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that, please?
Yeah, again, and it probably goes back to, and stop me if I'm going too far into this, but really in my college years, I took a couple of great courses following the civil rights movement, and really just led me on a path of racial injustice, throughout our country, throughout history, and kind of a turning point in my life, right? Grew up in central Minnesota, generally white population. When you go to college, it kind of expands your horizon, and it really opened my eyes to that, and I've been very sensitive to that sentiment within our country, I would say, since then. So I do have a belief that people are treated differently because of the color of their skin.
So you say you're originally from central Minnesota, without specifying the town. What county?
Let's call it Morrison County.
Okay.
Morrison County, Stearns County.
Sure.
Yeah.
One moment, Your Honor.
Okay.
And we'll do our best to get you to your wedding.
Thank you. I would really appreciate that.
What we're going to do is release you, and you're on your own. You don't have to check in at all. Until March 29th, we will start the trial at 9 a.m. And so I'd ask that you be here March 29th at 9 a.m. We're going to give you a reminder email or call, especially if the time changes. So if we change the time. Now, you have a letter that you brought in.
Yes.
Keep that.
Okay.
Please keep it safe, and make sure that you bring it with you next time, because that gets you into the building.
Okay.
And the deputy will take your yellow lanyard on the other
Okay.
hand. Any questions?
Many, but I don't need to take up the courtroom with those questions.
And go ahead and throw me under the bus with your fiance.
Okay, I will do that.
All right, thank you. You can go with the deputy. Yeah, you can just leave that. Thank you. All right, juror number 23 is next. Okay, if you could have a seat right up here. Good morning. And you are juror number 23, is that correct?
I am, yes.
All right. Before I turn the questioning over to the attorneys, a few matters. Number one, I'm going to swear you in so that all your questions and all the answers, rather, are under oath. So raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
I do.
All right, thank you. I'm going to ask you to pull up to the microphone a little bit to make sure we can hear. My hearing is not what it used to be, so I need a little bit of amplification. I appreciate that. And so let me start with a couple of questions about the questionnaire. You did fill out the questionnaire, and thank you for doing that, taking the time and getting it back to us. As you sit here right now, can you state that everything was true on the questionnaire?
Yes.
All right, and sometimes after you fill out the questionnaires, especially when there's been a delay in time, things might come to you that you thought, well, maybe I should have added that, or maybe I should have changed that. That wasn't quite accurate. As you sit here right now, is there anything of that sort that you wanted to bring up right now?
No. I don't remember specifics in it. As far as I know that it was truthful and as much as I could remember.
Okay.
So, yes.
One other thing is, I'm obviously wearing a mask and we have plexiglass between us. If you would prefer, you can take the mask off, but I leave that pretty much to you on what you wish to do.
I would like to take it off.
Oh, yes, feel
if
free.
that's okay with everybody else.
Plus,
There.
it makes it easier to hear as well. So.
It does. It's much more comfortable.
Excellent. What I'm going to ask you about is an advisory that was in the questionnaire, and that basically was don't read any media, don't pay attention, and hopefully don't watch any of these proceedings before you came up here.
Right.
I guess we had to make that clear to people that that includes don't watch the jury selection. But,
Exactly.
have you had any exposure to media? And usually it's inadvertent. What we're talking about is you're avoiding media, you're avoiding coverage, but somebody mentions something to you and you hear something,
And
or you see a headline.
You see a headline. I was just going to say that is exactly what it is. Coming up at the 10 o'clock news is, and they'll have a phrase,
Right.
a headline. Yeah.
Do you remember the substance of what it was you were
It was
exposed to?
basically jury selection beginning, that sort of thing. Nothing that I didn't already know, really. But
Okay,
that
so
was
no new information you learned?
no new information.
Nothing about
no.
the process, the people, just the start
No.
time? Okay.
No.
And so now you understand when I say inadvertently, you can't escape it.
Exactly.
All right, thank you. Anything else you can think of that you've heard?
No, I've been staying away from news and media.
Okay, then, I appreciate that. And like everyone else, you've seen something about this case and have some knowledge about maybe the basics of it. But from before you were summoned,
Yes.
the whole point of the questionnaire and our questions today is to arrive at a jury that can be fair and impartial, and that includes putting aside everything you've heard outside of this courtroom.
Right.
And if you're a jury, you have to decide just on the evidence and based on the law that I give you. Do you think you could do that?
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of people come in with certain opinions, and so the question is, can you put those opinions aside? It's not that you don't have opinions, just can you put them aside and decide the case on the law and the facts?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else you think I should know about you?
I think that's it.
Okay, the lawyers are going to follow up at
Yes.
this point, so Mr. Nelson, you may inquire as to juror 23.
Thank you, Your Honor.
One last advisory, and I think you've been doing pretty good with this. When we get into jury selection, sometimes it becomes conversational. And like every conversation, we talk over each other, we affirm in the middle of the question. So if you could try and wait for the question to be finished and then answer it, because we don't want people talking over each other, because the court reporter needs to take everything down.
No.
And myself and the lawyers tend to be the worst offenders with that, so don't worry if it happens. Mr. Nelson.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for your patience yesterday and for coming back this morning.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask you some questions, generally speaking, about you, and then ask you some follow-up questions about your questionnaire, if that's okay.
Sure.
And I understand that it has been a while since you've read this and you may not recall specifics, but we'll clarify if we need to, okay?
Sounds
All right.
good.
And I am going to ask you, I'm having a little hard time hearing you, so that microphone, if it,
Should I reset it? How's
oh,
that?
that's much better, much
Okay.
better.
The closer you can have it for yourself, because it's pretty hardwired. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Okay, thank you, Judge, and thank you. So let's just start with a basic question. If you and I were to meet in some social circumstance, tell me 2 or 3 things about yourself that you would like me to walk away knowing about you.
I live in Minneapolis. I have lived here for about 24 or more years. I work for a marketing company. I have a large family, extended family. I'm not sure what else I would.
Sure. Let me just ask you a couple of questions. When you say you've lived in the Minneapolis area for about 23, 24 years, you say?
I should clarify that. I've lived in the house that I'm in now for 24 years.
Okay.
I've lived in and around the cities for about 40.
40? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Where are you originally from, generally speaking?
I'm from western Minnesota.
Okay. And you say you have a large extended family. You mean brothers, sisters, nieces, nephews?
Exactly.
Okay. How many brothers and sisters did you have growing up?
6.
6?
There were 6 of us, I
Okay.
should say. So I have 5 plus me.
Gotcha. All right. And let me just ask you, when you received your notice that you were going to be called for jury duty, what was your just sort of initial thought that came into your mind?
I thought I had been thinking that I might be called for jury at some point, and I never have been. So I thought, oh, I was finally called for jury duty. That was my whole thought.
Gotcha. Did your thought process change when you found out that it would be in connection with this case?
Yes and no. This case is of such extreme importance that I was thinking that's not just a case, it's major case. So, but did I change my intent and say I didn't want to be a juror or anything like that? No, that was not the case.
Okay. Did you have any concerns for your personal safety?
No.
Okay. When you arrived at the Hennepin County Government Center yesterday and you saw the fortifications and soldiers and police officers, and what was your thought?
I thought, this place is secure.
So it helped you feel safe.
Very safe.
Good. When the judge informed you yesterday that at least for some period of time your anonymity or your name would not be released publicly, how did that make you feel?
That's fine.
Okay. So growing up with 5 brothers or sisters, I'm assuming that you at some point in your life had some conflict with one of them?
Oh, undoubtedly, yes.
Can you think of a situation where, again, whether it be in your personal or professional life, where you were called upon to resolve conflict between 2 people?
During my career, that's probably easiest. I had a staff at one time of between 30 and 40 people. And when they were all, although we were all working towards the same goal, how to get there was sometimes in different opinions. And in resolving conflict and disagreement in how to get to the same point. Usually what I would do is I would call them in and we would sit down and we would talk about it, because very often there was a misunderstanding between one and the other. Well, I thought he meant this. Well, I thought he meant that. And it was clarify what was going on. And then the rational point A to point B to point C usually came through. So that's how I would do it. First define it and clarify it.
Okay. So in that professional context, and there was a dispute between two people, somebody says, this is what happened, and someone else says, no, this is what happened. What tools would you bring to the table to try to determine which of those two stories was more truthful?
If there was any sort of documentation or a third party who could provide some information, trying to get to the final facts. What were the building blocks to this?
So looking for other evidence. In other
Looking
words.
for other evidence.
Seeing the whole picture was important.
Exactly.
Can you think of a situation where in your life, whether it be personal or professional, where you were 100% confident, I'm right, and then it turns out, oops, I'm wrong?
I was 100% wrong.
Yeah.
That did happen on occasion. I think anybody in life runs into that. I was so certain that a particular, in my case, what springs to mind, I was so convinced that a particular quality control process was just going to be wonderful, and it was going to bring error rate down to 0. And we did it, we installed it, we put it in, and 3 months later, error rate was up, and I had been totally and completely wrong.
And so how did you deal with that situation?
We took out that particular processing system and we put in a different one.
Okay. And so are you the type of person who's willing to kind of re-examine your perspective on things?
Absolutely. It was my final decision, and it was a wrong final decision.
So one of the things that you'll later be instructed on by the court is that you have to follow the law as the judge gives it to you, regardless of whether you agree with the law.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think you could do that?
Absolutely, yes.
You're not a lawyer, correct?
No.
All right, I just have to ask. And so I guess that really gets to the heart of the question is are you willing to listen to the evidence in court first? Would that be a yes?
Yes.
Are you willing to listen to the entirety of the evidence as presented by both sides?
Yes.
And are you willing to keep an open mind until all of the evidence is in?
Yes.
And then your job as a juror potentially would be to use the facts or determine the facts of what happens and apply it to the law as the judge gives it.
Exactly, yes.
And you would feel comfortable and confident doing that?
Yes.
Now, do you have any concerns for yourself as a result of COVID-19?
No.
Okay. So I'd like to turn to your questionnaire just to ask you a few brief follow-up questions. So first, you're obviously very much aware of the circumstance that brings us here today.
I'm aware of what brings us here today, yes.
Okay. In fact, I think you've seen the video you indicate 4 to 5 times.
I did. It was running almost continually last summer.
Okay.
That's when I saw it, though. I haven't seen it since.
So you saw it on the news or
Yes.
on, did you go on the internet to watch the video itself?
I didn't go on the internet. I just watched it on TV on news shows.
And so when you say you watched it 4 to 5 times, would you say that you watched it in its entirety or in snippets as presented by the media?
I can say I've never watched it in its entirety. I watched snippets, the 10 seconds or 20 seconds. I'm not sure how many seconds it is, but the short clips.
The ones that they play on the news?
Exactly.
Okay. And have you seen any other videos associated with this case? I think we were talking originally about the citizen video or the bystander video? Have you seen?
The bystander video is, I'm not sure which clips in the news were bystander and or where they came from, but it was all just the clips that were on the news.
Okay. But you don't recall seeing any other clips from different perspectives, different security cameras, the body cameras the officers wear?
Not on that
Not in that.
situation, no.
And you were asked a couple of questions on the questionnaire about your impression of Mr. Chauvin as well as Mr. Floyd, and I think your response was the same, which was neutral in both.
Exactly. Don't know them.
Can you explain why you chose that versus positive or negative?
Again, it's a situation of there's undoubtedly more information that I don't have, so I'm not in a position to judge. There's and a lot of relevant information, not just whatever. I think without knowing all the facts, it's impossible to say, well, that one was right and that one was wrong. It was, no, but I'm neutral. I would have to hear more on both sides.
Okay. There was a question on the questionnaire that asks if you've talked about this with your friends, family, coworkers. Generally, do you remember that question?
I do.
And you acknowledge you've had conversations with other people about?
Especially last year during the summer when it was going on, there were always, it was, I shouldn't say always conversation, but very frequent conversation about that.
And you say that the position that you had taken, that it seemed to be an avoidable tragedy, but there must also be additional relevant information. Would you stand by that statement today?
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's fair to say you formed some opinion as to that was more than just neutral in regards to what happened.
In looking at it the way things were presented, and again, it was clips, so you don't see the whole film. You don't see what happened before that, what happened after that. You just see that one clip. And if you just look at that one clip, that's all you have to judge. It doesn't, it's difficult to remain neutral and not say, well, that wasn't good.
Right.
But at the same time, you know that you're looking at this much of the picture. There's a lot more to it.
Fair enough. There was a question on the questionnaire that asked you whether you feel that the Twin Cities community or your community in specifically were negatively or positively affected by the protests that occurred after this incident, and you wrote negatively affected. Could you explain that more?
Minneapolis used to be the place where, at least in my opinion, people like coming to. I think with the riots on Lake Street and all the unrest that followed, it painted Minneapolis in a poor light. We can't control ourselves, and we can't, wasn't good.
You were also asked questions on your perspectives of both the Black Lives Matter and the Blue Lives Matter, and you wrote that I would very much like it changed to All Lives Matter. Can you just explain what you mean by that?
It's Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, All Lives Matter is the beginning and the end of it. It's not this piece matters, then you kind of wonder, what about all this piece over here? It's all lives matter.
You also indicated that you have a relative who is a sheriff's deputy in, I believe, western Minnesota?
Yes.
Do you speak with that relative frequently?
Only every couple of months, and we don't really talk law enforcement.
Sure. I was going to be my question. Does he ever talk about his job, tell you stories about
I know he's a deputy and a farmer. He's much more likely to talk about the farming part of his part of his life than the deputy part.
Gotcha. So if you were to be seated on this case as a juror, would you call your relative and say, you know, can you tell me about your training, or can you tell me how you would handle this situation?
I wouldn't, and he wouldn't respond in that situation. He would just say, no, it's not appropriate.
And it sounds like you have a brother who worked in court administration out in that same area as well, right?
Yes, he was in the 9th Judicial District, which was out of Bemidji.
Okay. And did he ever talk to your brother about his job as a court administrator?
He never, we never talked shop, as it were.
Okay. There was another question about the evaluation of graphic photographs or videos. And you said that it would be somewhat difficult, it would be definitely unpleasant, but doable. Could you expand on that a little bit more?
Would be one of the, in graphic detail, I think is what it was. It's one of those things where it's not like, let me take a look at that. It was one of those, yes, sometimes you have to look at unpleasant things, but it's not a thing that would frighten me or I would seek to avoid. I wouldn't necessarily seek it out, but I wouldn't avoid it either.
Okay. And my last series of questions focuses on the question where you were asked, do you want to serve as a juror in this case? And you checked the box, not sure. You said, this will be a very major trial. I absolutely want justice and a fair outcome, which will take intellectual, not emotional deliberation. So I guess the question is when you say you absolutely want justice and a fair outcome, what does that mean to you right now sitting here?
What I was thinking about on that was, do you want to be a juror? I would willingly be a juror. I was thinking more if there was somebody better qualified than me, better, had a different background that would be more pertinent to the situation, that would be fine. I'm not raising my hand in the air and waving and say, pick me, pick me. But if I were called to serve, I would. That was.
So I guess my question is does your perception of justice include the possibility of a not guilty verdict?
It includes not, yes, it does.
As
yes.
much as it could be a guilty verdict.
Exactly.
Right. And you would apply the law as the court gives it in terms of the presumption of innocence and the burden of doubt.
Yes.
The burden of proof, excuse me.
Yes.
If I may have a moment, Your Honor. Thank you, Your Honor. We'll pass the cross. One moment, Your Honor.
Sure. Jury 23, we're going to go off audio, which
Okay.
means we're still on the record.
Okay.
But in order to ask something that was in your questionnaire, we're going to go off the record, or on the record, but without the audio. We're going to go back on audio, which means it'll be broadcast again. And we are still on the record. So, Mr. Slisher, on the record.
Very good. Thank you very much. I'm wondering, you talked a little bit about some of the protests that occurred in the Minneapolis area. Obviously, this was something that you saw on TV, right?
Yes.
Did you see any usefulness to the protests at all?
Interesting question. Any usefulness? I personally didn't see any usefulness to it. I didn't see anything being accomplished by it, except, I suppose, bringing attention to the frustrations of the people involved. But did I see anything useful or good coming out of the whole burning Lake Street and all that sort of thing? I did not.
Have you ever personally participated in a protest?
I haven't.
Any of your close friends or family members ever participate in a protest of any kind?
I was all the way back to the 60s. Some of them may have been in the peace movement. I'm not sure, but anything in the last 20 years, no.
Okay.
I don't believe so.
And maybe we should try to, as you'd said, when you're talking about a problem, you like to define it, right? So maybe we should define some terms. There's different events that occur, and if you recall the Women's March that happened a few years ago, the large gathering of people marching on the Capitol in St. Paul. Were you aware of that?
I remember it a little. Not. I wasn't there, but I remember a little.
Would you consider that to be a protest, a demonstration? What would that be?
I would consider that to be more along the lines of a demonstration. Calling for attention to something, I would call it a demonstration.
Okay. And so then, and it's not a trick question, but then I'd like you to tell me, in your mind, what distinguishes a protest from a riot from a demonstration, if you could talk about those things.
A demonstration is, in my opinion, I would consider anything that would be nonviolent, bringing attention to a topic by means of having something that people would look at and say, I see what they're doing here. A protest would be more of a sit-down strike, or not sit-down necessarily, but more of a strike. I'm not going to do it anymore, whatever you're asking me to do. No, that would be a more of a protest. And what was the other one? I'm sorry?
A riot.
A riot. A riot is, in my opinion, a free-for-all. Let's just go out, burn something down, and have, enjoy ourselves while doing it. That's not a good thing.
And so, from what you observed on the news, is what happened in the aftermath of George Floyd's death. Was that a demonstration, a protest, a riot, some sort of a combination?
I think parts of it were actual demonstrations. But it evolved into a riot, on particularly the nights when buildings were set afire, that sort of thing. That isn't protesting, that isn't demonstrating, that's rioting. All the looting, it's hard to say that was part of a demonstration. That was a riot.
2020 was quite the year, right? We started off with the
Yes.
COVID pandemic.
Yes.
And then of course, all of this happened, and we've been. Have you been at home, sheltering at home with the rest of us?
I have. I had a regular office that I went to, but as of, I believe it was the 1st of May, or maybe it was in May anyway, that closed, and I ended up working from home, as most everybody did, and the world got a little smaller. But
Yeah. It did. Did you find that your TV consumption increased, decreased, or stayed the same while you were working from home?
it probably increased, but the networks probably wouldn't like hearing this, but what really went up was our Netflix. And those type offerings, the Disney Channel, those went way up from what they had been before. Regular network news and or network programming probably didn't change very much.
The decision to work at home, to essentially close your office, were you part of that decision-making process?
I was. I could have moved to a different office or whatever, but it seemed, because COVID there was no particular end in sight. It could be a few months, it could be a year, it could be whatever. It seemed the most practical situation was, for me and for a lot of other people, was just to work at home.
You know, there were some people, and perhaps very vocal folks, who would say that the restrictions that the government placed on people for social gatherings and whatnot went a little too far. What do you think about that?
I can understand where they were coming from, but I also believe that in some cases they may have gone a little too far. I think some of the elementary schools, a lot of the things with the kids, I think could have been opened or redirected a little bit, rather than just closing early learning centers, figuring out a way to proceed. But hindsight is always 20/20. So,
bars, restaurants, gyms. What's your opinion of the
There were-
restrictions there?
erring on the side of conservatism and just trying to keep it as as safe as possible. I think also that may have, as it turned out, gone overboard. But then you hear other situations where there's a hot spot that pops up somewhere, that because 300 people got together for a wedding, and then you suddenly think maybe it is a good idea that we closed all the restaurants. I don't really know.
It's hard to know.
It is hard to know.
And some of the folks who were upset about some of those decisions were very upset, right? Shop owners who were closed, restaurant owners who had to close down and they're losing money. And some of those people let their opinions be known. Did you see any of the protests or demonstrations that occurred with some of the folks who were protesting the restrictions that the government was placing on us in the COVID era?
I remember some of the news stories in them. I didn't personally see any demonstrations or in-person type of things, but I can understand where they're coming from, because it was like, we want you to stay in business, but we aren't going to let you have any customers. Ooh, that's a tough thing to do.
And some of those individuals did get together, gather at the Capitol, gather in front of the governor's mansion. I don't know if you saw any footage of those events.
It doesn't spring to mind if I did.
Okay. Would you have any opinion as to whether or not any good came out of those individuals voicing their opinions?
I think in that situation, it goes back to, it brought attention to the situation. With the COVID crisis, I think a lot of people were looking at their own personal situation and weren't really thinking a lot about what it was doing to other people. It was, I have to keep the kids at home, I have to do this and that. It was all what was happening in your own household. I think when the restaurant owners and business owners pointed out that, by the way, this is really, really hurting us. It focused not only the public's attention, but it also the government's attention on it, as far as you can keep building up restrictions over here, but look at the ramifications, all of the ramifications.
So in that instance, it did, call attention to, some issues that needed to be discussed.
Yes, and it probably brought the lifting of the restrictions even a little bit, where 10% were allowed in, or 20%, I think it probably brought that. Otherwise, I don't think the openings would have been opening quite as soon as they did. But that's my opinion. I don't know, but I think it may have worked.
I appreciate you explaining it to us. I do. Would it be fair to say, when we talk about the few clips of about this case that you have seen, it doesn't seem that you remember that much detail about it. Is that fair?
That's fair. And I haven't watched it in the last few months, so it was from last summer, and I've seen it.
And I think you did say that, the little bit you saw, the few frames you saw, I mean, that was something that did bother you or made you question what was going on.
I thought there has to be, there's more of a, what's going on here, yes.
Maybe there's more to this story than what I'm seeing.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so I'm curious, what other information would you want to know, in order to understand this?
Usually there's a series of events that happen. This happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens. And I also like to know, and then what happened after that? What happened over here? So I know I've seen this little clip, this much here. I haven't seen any of this, and I haven't seen any of that. I would need to know more to have a firm opinion, I believe.
You have a large extended family, and you've been in the same community for a long time. And so I'm assuming you know a lot of people, and I'm wondering if you have ever had anyone in your life, a close friend or a family member, who has struggled with drug addiction.
Drug addiction?
Yeah.
Not to my knowledge. I do not believe so.
Do you have any strong opinions, one way or the other, about people who use illegal drugs? And we can even use the phrase hard drugs, harder than marijuana.
It's not a good choice. I don't know how to put it. You don't know what put a person in that situation. But at the same time, it's not a good thing. And avoid it at all costs.
Yeah. And if someone does make that choice and take drugs, some might say that if then they get into a struggle with police and they're on drugs, then maybe that's
rephrase, counsel, too much of my
okay. Do you think that you would have an opinion, one way or the other, about if drug use in any way affected or was involved in this situation?
It would be an element of the situation, what happened and why it happened. It would be a pertinent piece of information. I wouldn't outright make a decision on it as far as, well, that's the final answer. It would be that's a piece of the pertinent information.
And just with your own understanding of drugs, what about that do you think would make it pertinent?
What would make it pertinent is the action of the person, as far as I'm basing this on not a lot of experience in the drug world, but does the person who has been taking drugs, are they coherent? Are they in a position to are they doing what they are intending to do, or are they somewhere else? These things I'm not an expert on, so I don't really know.
So we've talked a little bit about Netflix and network television. Do you watch crime shows on TV?
Some there, again, this networks, in my opinion, networks are not going to like me at all, but they drowned us in them. It was NCIS every day and this and that and all the rest, and we got tired of them, so we turned our dial, and we don't watch crime shows very often, no.
What about true crime shows, documentaries?
I like historical shows, like on TPT, tell me about the true story of Billy the Kid, and I will watch it, and I that sort of thing. But could you come into my house and actually see a crime show on TV? It's possible, but it wouldn't be a routine at all.
So your nephew. Oh.
Time to take a morning break. So we're
okay.
going to have you return to the courtroom with the deputy, and at the same time, we'll have you back at 5 minutes to 11.
Okay.
So we are on recess until 10:55. Kids Seat Council and Chambers.